I'm Ben van Beurden, the CEO of Shell, and you're watching Whose Time?
我们对于中国市场怀有更大的愿景。时隔2年，荷兰皇家壳牌公司首席执行官范伯登再次于北京接受财新时间专访时，又一次强调了壳牌对于中国市场的极高重视。伴随原油市场不确定性加大，天然气市场发展迅速，可再生能源、新能源需求不断提升。这家有着110多年历史的全球石油巨头，正在经历一场颠覆性的能源变革，力求实现向全方位能源企业的转型。成立于1907年的壳牌总部位于荷兰海牙，目前在全球超过70个国家和地区开展业务，员工超过8万人。2017年，得益于全球油气价格及产量回升，壳牌取得不俗的业绩，于财富全球500强企业排名中位列第7，全年销售额达到3052亿美元，盈利增长超过1倍。担任壳牌 CEO 已有4年多时间的范伯登，在壳牌有超过30年的工作经历，在壳牌的上游业务和下游业务都积累了丰富的经验。经常到访中国的他，对于壳牌的中国业务战略也有着详细的规划。2年时间过去，对于壳牌在中国的发展，他会有哪些新的评价？
You mentioned how important the Chinese market in the Shell's global strategies, but 2 years passed, that things changed. What's the significance of the Chinese market in your global strategy right now?
Well, a few things have changed, but also a few things haven't changed. So I'm sure I must have said 2 years ago that, of course, our presence in China is still very small compared to the potential of the market. That we have to have much higher aspirations than what we are currently doing. But a few things did change, of course. Since the last 2 years, we have, of course, acquired another company, BG Group. So as a result of that and a few other activities, we are now the largest supplier of liquefied natural gas to the country. And that is a very important business for us. China is, of course, our largest market in that respect too. We are about to double our petrochemicals position in Guangdong in the joint venture we have with CNOOC. And I think we have continued to grow quite well in our retail and our lubricants footprint. But as I said, these are still small businesses compared to the potential that the market has to offer.
So how is Shell's business going in China, for example, in the gas stations or gas exploitations?
I think it's going well. We have seen a very good improvement in profitability of the business. I think, again, our petrochemicals position is very strong and enjoys also very good operational and financial results. Our retail strategy is working out well, and we have ambitions to grow that much faster. We have, at the moment, about 1,200 retail stations. On a total of 40,000 retail stations, that still means that China is a relatively small market for us, but we have the ambition to triple that by 2025. But at the same time also, we are investing heavily in a new phase of Changbei, which is the tight gas supply project that supplies a very significant part of Beijing's natural gas. And this year we will be ramping up investment there, with probably a few more phases to come. So I think the strategy is developing well. It is going at a good pace, but we have a long road ahead of us still.
What takes the biggest part?
I think at this point in time, I would say both petrochemicals and natural gas are large. And many of the other businesses are still very much in growth mode. But I would say almost every aspect of our business in China is growing.
And we know because of the last year, the rising of price as well as the oil and gas production, actually the profit of Shell is double last year. So what's the goal for this year?
Well, we don't make profit forecast, I'm afraid. No, we never do, because our business is so much, of course, I wouldn't say unpredictable, but it's so much driven by how global oil and gas prices move, how refining margins move, and everything else. But we have said a few things about where we want to be. You're right. 2017 was a very important year for us. It was, I think, the year where we had to prove that we have what it takes to be a world-class investment case. The amount of cash that we generated in 2017 was as much as it was when the oil price was twice as high. So, you know, we had $52 a barrel last year. We generated as much cash as when the oil price was $100 a barrel. So it shows how much we have improved the quality of the portfolio. What we have said is by the end of the decade, take $60 oil, we want to have a free cash flow, which is a very important indicator for me, a free cash flow of around $25 to $30 billion. That used to be $5 billion. So a massive financial transformation that is underway, and I think in 2017 we have shown that we are on track for that transformation.
在中国，除商业活动之外，壳牌还深度参与到能源相关的研究工作之中。自2011年起，壳牌与国务院发展研究中心合作研究中国中长期能源发展战略课题，并相继发布了2个阶段的报告。今年3月下旬，第3阶段报告《高质量能源支持高质量发展：新时代的中国能源革命》正式发布，聚焦中国能源结构变化与产业升级，强调从能源节约、散煤替代和清洁化传统能源和清洁能源协调发展，加强电力生产、构建智慧能源系统和改善全球能源治理等6个方面着力，进一步推动中国能源革命的进程。
Today, Shell and the CDRF has released the China Energy Research Report, which is a stage 3. Maybe you can briefly give us some conclusion of this report.
Well, we have been working together with DRC for, I think, 8 years now. It started in 2011. And we have been doing a number of studies with them, which have been, I think, quite influential in how energy policy is being shaped in China. The first phase was very much a general sort of energy review. The second phase, we focused very much on natural gas. And in this third phase, we are focusing on the energy transition. What needs to happen? What sort of policies does China need to adopt to make the energy transition effective and fast? And again, it's, as I said earlier on, it's focusing on how do we make sure that a good combination of government-directed mandates and policies are combined with market reform that actually creates efficiency in how this all happens. So things that we look at is how does more electrification happen? What needs to happen to design a market where electrification can take off? How do we make sure that the shift from coal to gas is faster and more effective? What sort of policies do we need for that? But also, how do we put a carbon market in place? A carbon market will be a very important element of the energy transition, putting a price on carbon, making sure that investors, users are incentivized to be more efficient or to reduce their emissions. But also I think the beginnings of what I think would be very important, how can China play a much more prominent role globally? If you think about it, energy is the largest market in the world. But the governance of that market is very fragmented, almost absent. There is no global agreement on how we govern energy. And I think as the largest player in that space, there's a role for China to be played. And I think China has also the emerging appetite and the capacity through the vision of President Xi to play a more prominent role in energy governance.
Then how do you think the changes of Chinese energy field in recent years?
Well, I think there's been a lot of stimulation. The whole idea that we need to go to a cleaner system, with coal being phased out and with other forms of energy coming in, I think has been quite phenomenal. And I think the world, is taking note of it as well. If you look back at the last, say, 5 years, or if you take 2010 to 2015, the energy intensity of the economy has been reducing with about 20%. And if you now look forward towards 2020, we think another 20% of energy efficiency improvement will be made. We see a tremendous reduction in the amount of coal in the energy mix. on a scale that is, I think, unparalleled. I think China is making the single biggest contribution to retiring coal. And all of that is a result of very deliberate policies that the government have been put in place.
2016年，壳牌斥530亿美元巨资收购英国天然气集团，成为全球最大 LNG 公司，在业界引起极大关注。天然气也成为壳牌发展战略规划中越来越重要的部分。根据不久前壳牌发布的年度 LNG 前景报告，中国已经成为全球第2大 LNG 进口国。2017年，中国大气污染治理进程加快，推动煤改气，天然气市场一度出现气荒。一方面保持中国最大进口 LNG 供应商地位，另一方面，壳牌也立足国内天然气生产，继续与中石油合作开发常备项目，向北京及周边地区供应天然气。
Based on the impact of China environmental policy last year, and we can see natural gas consumption grow very fast. So how do you see right now the development process of the natural gas consumption in China?
I think President Xi has been very clear at the 19th Party Congress. You know, we are in a new era. We need a higher quality of life. With that, we also need to have a higher quality energy system. That basically means less coal, cleaner energy forms, so more natural gas, also, of course, more renewables in the mix. But for now, the shift from coal to gas is probably the fastest way in which the energy system can become a higher quality system. The percentage of natural gas in the energy mix is still relatively small. It's still a bit over 6%, and it needs to double. And then maybe even needs to triple, because compared to, say, Europe or the United States, China is still well behind in terms of natural gas in the energy mix. Now, as a result of it, natural gas is growing fast, and the country needs to do everything it can in order to bring the supply on. Of course, companies like us can help with domestic resource development, like we are doing in Changbai, but also with bringing imports in. Of course, one of the challenges is the infrastructure, and not just the infrastructure of the pipelines, the LNG import facilities, but also how do you deal with winter and summer variations. So building storage capacity to deal with high demand in winter, low demand in summer, but nevertheless a very steady demand of supply. These are some of the growing pains that we are seeing at the moment. But we also see a strong willingness of the government to address these things.
What's the percentage of the natural gas consumption in other countries you mentioned before?
It varies a little bit, but the more, let's say, more advanced economies have up to 30–35% of natural gas in the mix. And in that sense, therefore, China is only beginning on the journey of increased gas. Where that will go, it's hard to say. It depends on a number of scenarios, how that can play out. One way or other, we will see also more renewable energy come in the mix. We see more electrification of the economy. That may help, but also may limit the amount of natural gas. But under any scenario, we see at least a doubling in the next 10–15 years, if not a tripling altogether.
近年来，在全球能源消费转型加速的背景下，壳牌展开一系列业务调整，其中重要的举措之一是加大新能源领域的投资布局。近期，壳牌发布了公司的能源转型报告，计划扩大新能源业务部的投资，每年投资可再生及低碳能源10到20亿美元，其中大部分投资预计将进入包括光伏、风电在内的发电领域，在全球实施能源转型的重点地区拓展新能源业务。包括在荷兰投资风电业务，在英国投资售电业务，以及投资加氢设施和电动汽车充电装置等等。对于目前壳牌在新能源领域的着力，范伯登会给出怎样的解读
I think for new energies we are, as a company, of course, also still very much at the beginning. What I've said very clearly, I want our company to thrive in the energy transition. The energy transition means more electrification globally, so I want us to be a competent company when it comes to power. I also want us to be more in hydrogen and in biofuel. So all these things we have been focusing on through a new business called New Energies. But it's still relatively small in comparison with the rest of Shell. So we've said up to the end of the decade, let's invest, say, between $1 and $2 billion a year in this. Some people say that's not enough, it's a small percentage of your total capital investment. But I would say, you know, for a startup company, which is what we are in New Energies, there are not too many investors with $2 billion a year of investment program. But where we will be focusing is, of course, very much when it comes to electricity and power, we will be focusing on the entire value chain, so generation, but also the piece in the middle, trading, optimization, customers, decentralized generation and marketing, etc. And the reason why we believe this is important for our company is because if you look forward into, say, the middle second half of this century, we will see that power will be more than 50% of the total energy system. Today it's only 20 or less than 20, but it will be more than half, and the energy system will be even bigger than it is today. So it is a part of the energy system that we cannot ignore. If we want to be a world-class company, we have to be in electricity as well. So what we are doing at the moment is we are putting that integrated business together. So we have been acquiring a company that can develop solar power generation. We have been bidding and winning on wind farms in North Sea. But on the other hand, we are also in the customer end of things. So we acquired a power utility company in the United States, in the UK, a charging company, New Motion, that does about 100,000 charging points throughout Europe. In China, we're looking at lots of opportunities as well. And while China is not yet fully opened up for players like us to invest in the integrated power value chain, that moment will come. So, we have to see. But I think China has the capacity to continuously surprise. Things will happen much faster than what people tend to believe.
When the electric car is going to become, the mainstream transportation tools on the road?
That will take some time. I mean, you know, if you look at the rate of change and the growth in electric vehicles, it's phenomenal. But it's phenomenal from a relatively small base. You see ever more electric cars in the streets, also in China, of course. And you know, more than half of the electric vehicles in the world are owned by a Chinese person. Yeah. But I think in advanced and advancing economies, the growth is, in percentage terms, very high. Having said that, of course, the total growth in vehicles is even higher. So before electric vehicles will have taken up so much space that they really start to impact the total oil demand, I think we're probably in the early 2030s. And that is not because we don't believe electric vehicles will grow. We actually believe they will grow at a phenomenal rate. But the total passenger fleet is so much higher. And there are, of course, so many other parts of the world where electric vehicles are not a viable proposition. Think of Africa. Think of many other places where, you know, either the size of the country or the availability of affordable electricity or the economic development is at a point where we cannot have large-scale electrification of mobility yet. So it will take years, but it will come and it will make a major difference. And when it's there, we want to be a winner in that space as well.
随着全球气候变化问题日益凸显，包括壳牌在内的大型能源企业开始采取更多行动，以帮助实现巴黎协定所设定的减排目标，包括进一步提高资产的运营效率，开发碳捕集与封存技术，加强在清洁能源领域的投资。2017年底，壳牌表示，到2035年要将能源生产消费过程中的碳排放量减少20%，到2050年减少50%。而要实现这一目标，壳牌需要做的还有很多。
And also speaking of the carbon emissions, I remember you said Shell gonna cut its carbon emission by 2050 by half. So what's...
So what we have said is we will reduce our carbon footprint, the carbon footprint of our energy products. And maybe I need to explain that a little bit better. Because if you just look at our emissions are significant, but they are still relatively small in the bigger scheme of things. Altogether, our total greenhouse gas emissions from our operations are about 100 million tons per year. That's a lot, but it is, it's half of New York State. Yeah? If you look at all the carbon emissions of our products, so the emissions that our customers make with our products, it's about 14 to 1,500 million tons, and that's a whole lot more. So what we have said is we need to work on that 14 to 1,500 million tons of carbon emissions. We need to make sure that the emissions per unit of energy that our customers use is being halved by 2050. Now, why do I say halved? Because if the world needs to meet the goals from Paris, the CO2 emissions per unit of energy will need to come down and almost need to halve by 2050. And that means that for Shell, we need to be in line with society. The products that we sell need to be the products that society needs on its way to this 2 degrees C outcome. Now, 2050 is a long way out. So you said, listen, 2035, we should already have a 20% reduction. And that is what we are doing.
Actually, when we talk about the energy policy and supplies, people always think about right now is very urgent issue in China is environmental issues.
Yeah.
It has. Every people wonder this problem. How do you see the relativity between the energy structures of those environmental issues in China? What's your suggestions for China to solve this problem? What's the step one?
Step one, if you talk about the air quality, of course, the most important part is to just phase coal out of the energy mix as fast as possible. Now, China cannot go to zero coal in a very short period of time. We have to accept that coal will be a part of the energy mix for some time to come, actually quite a long time to come. But of course, moving some of the more heavy coal polluters away from urban centers, making sure that the standards of coal-fired power generation or coal use for general industrial purposes these standards are being raised. Taking coal out of domestic heating, which is quite often, of course, a very low-grade coal and completely unmitigated. All these things can actually have a significant impact in a relatively short period of time. And I think for most in these areas, it is actually natural gas that is the fastest, most effective, most efficient way of dealing with it. But then there's other things as well, which is, of course, improving the quality of mobility fuels. So putting natural gas in heavy-duty trucks, which also are very important sources of emissions, can be the next big step. China is doing that. China has the highest percentage or the highest number of LNG-driven or LNG-fueled trucks on the road. China has the highest number of electric vehicles on the road as well. So these are all sensible things that need to be pursued, need to be accelerated. And I think the government is onto this. It's just that, of course, the scale of the country is so massive that it will take some time before we see the full impact.
Yes, and also as for China is trying to carry out a series of carbon emission trading permit policies.
I think increasingly, and certainly President Xi, but also the government generally is seeing that, China has a role to play, of course, not just in its own country and for its own population, but also for the planet. As the largest carbon emitter, China had to put down some very significant commitments in the context of the Paris Agreement. Now, the good thing is there are many tools for China to play with. Again, moving coal to gas will not only improve the air quality, but will also significantly improve the CO2 emissions. Getting the economy more efficient is not only good for the climate, but it's also good for general economic development. So all these things work together. They don't work against each other. I believe China has an unbelievable advantage because of its scale and the scale of its economy and its ability to do coordinated policy implementation. So putting the largest, absolutely the largest carbon trading system in place in the world will be a major step forward as well. China has the advantage to learn from some of the mistakes that have been made with carbon trading in places like Europe and elsewhere. But if we see that system coming in place and working effectively, putting a real price on carbon, and really impacting large emitters and driving efficiency improvements, over time hopefully also driving things like carbon capture and storage, I think we will see a massive change in the emissions from China.